Czechast, a podcast in English about Czech and Moravian society, history, culture and economy.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Czechast, the podcast where we explore all things Czech, music, history, culture and the stories that bring them to life. I'm Vít Pohanka, your host, and if you listened to the last episode, you know I had the privilege of speaking with Jakub Hrůša, one of the most distinguished Czech conductors of our time. Starting this September, he will take on the prestigious role of music director at the Royal Opera House in Covent Garden, London, a major milestone in his already impressive career. In the second part of our conversation, we explore Jakub's artistic vision and at least some of his programming decisions. When he first conducted at the BBC Proms in 2017, he made a bold programming choice that highlighted a powerful theme in Czech music.
It was a very clear programmatic idea. It was a focus on the idea of the inspiration so important in the history of our musical culture in the 19th century of the Hussite chorale, Husický chorál. So I even had a local chorus, BBC singers who sang Ktož sú boží bojovníci, who are warriors of gods, in unison, like the way the Hussites might have sung it on the battlefield.
But we will also discuss what awaits him at Covent Garden and how he views the challenge of stepping into this prestigious role after the long and highly regarded tenure of Sir Antonio Pappano.
It will take years for me really to prove myself after this amazing tenure of Tony Pappano, who rightly is considered one of the best opera conductors out there. And he was there, as I said, for 22 years. And I thought, now, it's really a hard thing to follow. And yet, it feels like the best thing ever.
So, whether you're passionate about classical music, curious about the world of opera, or just love a good story about artistry and ambition, this episode is for you. And stay with us for the second part of my conversation with Jakub Hrůša.
Czechast, a podcast in English about all things Czech. Whether you're an English-speaking expat living in Czechia and Slovakia, or a descendant of the Czechs, Moravians and Slovaks who left for a better life in America, Australia, Britain or Canada so long ago that you don't speak the language of the old country, this podcast in English is for you.
We will start with Jakub's answer to my question. There is a Czech saying, co Čech, to muzikant, meaning that every Czech is a musician. So does he think there is still some truth in it now in the 21st century?
I think co Čech, to muzikant was valid in the 18th century because the recruitment of musicians in Europe was somehow surprisingly almost dominated by Czech instrumentalists. But it's also maybe, and that's the other side of the same coin, because they didn't find enough opportunities to work back home, and so they flooded the surrounding countries, and there was an aspect of it as well. I think music is important, and generally art is important in our area of the world, in Central Europe. After all, if we really consider ourselves a part of this Central European identity, if I can put it that way, I think that's where at least a huge part of, especially instrumental classical music, has its most intense home, so to speak. You know, it always was full of music making of that kind. Like Italian talent is the opera, of course, singing and of course Baroque music and the luthiers and building the violins and and so on. Similarly, theater, very much so in Britain, for example. Every place in the world has some inclination. So I think music is or has been important always for us. But maybe it has to do also with the size of our country, where somehow also the cultural, the focus or directing the best talents of people into art and into music maybe is a side product of being relatively weaker in terms of politics, so I think because art, unlike business, is, at least in an ideal world before globalization, is very much thrives on the local inspiration. The best results of art usually have some kind of a natural connection towards the place where you live and where you're at home and you grow up, has given you or gives you. And this Czech nationalistic upheaval, in the 19th century, of course, added to it, because suddenly it was a period in which so many composers really wanted to start to be much more connected to what the local sources of inspiration are. So, in fact, I think it was a very specific period of the 19th century and the first half of the 20th century where this amazing flood of just extraordinary quality of composing, for example, appeared in our sphere of the world. So indeed, you named Smetana, Dvořák, you should name Janáček, you should name Martinu. It's composers who are really like top stars in the world of classical music. I don't think Dvořák is any worse off than Chopin. Of course, Chopin is a very specific case because it's all about piano, of course. But Chopin doesn't have any orchestral pieces, for example, so there we are much better off because Dvořák wrote operas, cantatas, and concerti, and symphonies, and chamber music, and whatever you think about. And he is really among, say, top 10 composers of the world, absolutely clearly. And the beautiful thing is that he is amongst top 10 composers of the world, not only because that's the first thing, because he was a master, genius, talented, hardworking, simply an amazing composer as such anyway. And he would be one even if he spoke German and lived in Berlin or Vienna. But in fact, the popularity of his is inevitably connected to his Czechness as well. Well, people like the flavor of his music, which very naturally reflects our traditions and our songs and dances and roots and so on. But I should stop there, probably, because I don't think nowadays in the year 2025 we should not just be all the time speaking about how great we are in music and name Janáček and Dvořák, But I still think, and I would so much wish it doesn't change too much, I still think really that, for example, our relationship to music education in the Czech Republic is still on relatively virtuous and high level compared to majority of countries. And sometimes people cynically say, it's only because we are behind, and we will also get there where Western European countries, for example, are. And I am very sad about it, because it seems like everything which is not pragmatically causing an effect is put aside, and this ever appraised an idea of progress, and simply people in so many countries consider music as something which can be tolerated as a personal hobby, and that I think it's something extremely important for us human beings, and something extremely beneficial for children, especially growing up children. And there in this area, compared to Italy, where you don't have music in elementary schools, compared to state education in Britain, where you don't have music much present. Now here in Bavaria, in Munich, they are discussing also cancelling education of music because it's considered redundant, and I find it just a catastrophe. And I would wish also seeing how much public there is for classical music in the Czech Republic still, even young generations. Of course, I'm not naive, so I know I live in some kind of a bubble, but still compared to some other countries who are so oriented about just business, money, economic profit, or whatever, not that music doesn't bring it, it brings it as well. We still see a huge amount of interest about arts. And I say, like, even people who don't really go ever to a concert hall or to an opera performance, they still somehow register it exists. And I think it has to do also with a specific identity of our country, where we kind of hold together in some way. It has also its problems. We can be chauvinistic or not tolerant enough and not diverse enough, but it creates this kind of connection amongst ourselves, which holds music somehow in esteem, at least relatively. And that's what I am very proud of. And that's actually, in all honesty, many other countries actually envy us, because they think how it's possible. It's a simple fact, like in Britain, it would be impossible ever that a prime minister or a minister of culture would go to a concert and opera performance, because it's out of their scope. They just never do it. And we still have these also symbolic acts. Say the president Petr Pavel just says, yes, I will have a symphony orchestra playing a Te Deum at my inauguration. It's these little things, even if he might not be religious and he might not be a fan of classical music, but he acknowledges it's important for the culture of our country. And that's something I'm, at least for the time being, very proud of.
We actually only kind of touched on it, but the fact itself that there are elementary musical schools, zušky, základní umělecké školy in Czechia, it's actually quite unique. I did a program a few years back, about half hour long, both in Czech and English, about the existence of these schools, and that they are financed totally by the state and the cities, the communities. It's kind of half-half. And that's really unique, isn't it? I mean, there's nothing like that in Bavaria, where you are right now.
No, I think there are institutions like that, but say in Britain, where my kids grow up, of course, if you go to a private, or you should say independent school, those are full of music, but it costs money, of course. I mean, it's the best investment of money you can do, and that's how I take it. And when you find an amazing school of that relatively traditional type, you have the best of best, and you have so much music there, and it's really amazing. That's what we don't have in the Czech Republic. But of course, what creates the general spirit of the country is the net of the state schools, and that's, then forget it. I mean, no music at all. And actually it becomes really a problem, because basically that's in a diversion, what comes back to me as a music director of the Royal Opera House, that actually people just say the young families or young children cannot afford to learn music, because the only way to do it is to pay for a private teacher, and families just have to be careful about how they distribute their money. And of course, we shouldn't go too far, because people are crazily able to pay so much money for nonsense of the highest caliber, and they wouldn't put money into something important. But that's everyone's choice, of course. But basically, the argument remains like it can be very elitist. Only rich people can actually afford to have a teacher for music, and that's what is totally absent. This problem, in at least for the time being, in our country, and it's very beautiful. I mean, the whole idea that anyone basically can go from the primary school and on the way home attend the primary artistic school, and for very little money to get musical education. It's just fantastic. And it's just not music. It's also drawing, and painting and visual arts and ballet and theater, you name it.
Exactly. I mean, just for the benefit of the listeners who might listen to us, I don't know, in the United States, the elementary artistic schools, they are not just musical schools. I mean, they have these programs and they cost really just a fraction of an average monthly salary in Czechia for a whole year. Yeah. So it's, you pay something, but it's very little. But let me steer this a discussion a little bit more to London, because that's where you are going to be now, I suppose, most of the time, even though you are speaking from Bamberg. I looked up that you had your debut at London Proms in 2017, right?
That was my prom debut, yeah. But I had
prom debut. Yeah, that's what I meant.
It's in London before, but yeah.
You had been to London before.
Yeah,
your prom debut. And I mean, the reason why I'm mentioning that is what I read was that you had a special program with Czech music. And I was wondering which composers you chose.
Oh, it was a very clear programmatic idea. It was a focus on the idea of the inspiration so important in the history of our musical culture in the 19th century of the Hussite chorale, Husický chorál. So we at one point in the discussion, this idea arose, and then I suggested really a selection of pieces which all had to do with this inspiration. So I even had a local chorus, BBC singers who sang Ktož sú boží bojovníci, who are warriors of gods, in unison, like the way the Hussites might have sung it on the battlefield. And then we continued through all possible pieces influenced by that. Tábor and Blaník by Smetana. And then we played an excerpt of the next thing was the Field Mass by Martinu. Of course, that's not naturally so closely connected to the Hussite chorale, but there was the idea of music played or sung on the battlefield, basically. And then we played a part of the excursions of Mr. Brouček to the 15th century by Janáček, where the idea of the Hussites and their virtues and historical importance is also, depicted. And we played Husitská overture by Dvořák, and we played Suk's symphonic poem Prague, which doesn't explicitly have a Hussite chorale as its material, but it's so similar to it that many people actually think it's like that. Suk very vehemently said he didn't want to copy it or didn't want to reflect it, but actually the virtue is the same. So it was one of the most interesting programs I've ever done, because it had a very clear focus in one direction, and yet it was extremely rich and extremely colorful.
But it was concentrating on the Hussite kind of heritage, right? If I say
yes,
and the reflection in music.
Yeah, it was a thread of it which connected the pieces which would have been interesting even without it. It's one of those cases where you find a very beautiful general connection between pieces which anyway would work well in a repertoire of a concert.
Now, you're set to become the music director of the Royal Opera House in Covent Garden in London in September of 2025. And you are the first Czech after Rafael Kubelik, right, who's going to hold that position.
Well, sorry to interrupt you. It's true. It's always mentioned, and of course, I should not negate it because it's, of course, absolutely true. So I acknowledge it. And as I told you, Kubelik is probably, amongst the conductors of the past, definitely the most famous Czech conductor internationally, and also the one who succeeded, and that's quite important, equally much in the field of conducting Czech music and in absolutely universal repertoire of other kinds. He was as great in Dvořák as in Mozart, as in Richard Wagner. Actually, some of the absolutely best recordings of Wagner's music are by Kubelik. It's a general recognition. It's not just my idea. And as well, contemporary music, But why I stopped you, because you say that the only second Czech after Kubelik, well, there were not so many of those music directors. The tenure of music directorship in that house is usually, in average, like at least 10 years, if not 15. So between the war years when the current form of Royal Opera House was built, there were not so many. There was Karl Rankel, there was Kubelik, there was George Solti, a Hungarian conductor. There was Sir Colin Davis, who was British. That's 4. 5, Bernard Haitink, a Dutch conductor. Antonio Papano, who was there for 22 years. And it's me now. So I am only the 7th one. So there's no wonder that I would just put it a different way. It's extraordinary, actually, that within that number of conductors, there happen to be 2 Czech guys,
You are listening to Czechast, a podcast in English about all things Czech. I'm Vít Pohanka, the host, and my guest today is Jakub Hrůša, a prominent Czech music director who's going to take over the music directorship of the Royal Opera House in Covent Garden, London. And don't get this wrong, I'm no kind of nationalist, but, you are a Czech in Covent Garden, in this big London, in this big city, which has got almost the same population like whole of our country. And you are there. I mean, that's the top of the, I would say top of the pops, which was something completely different on the BBC. But that's really top of the world, isn't it? How do you feel about that?
I felt a little concerned about too much of a responsibility between the appointment 3 years ago and my first work after the appointment, which has just finished, I'm now in December and January on Jenůfa. And so I felt like a swimmer who loves to be in water and knows he's going to swim in the best water in the world and knows that he is really great at swimming, and knowing that it's not just the best arrangement of a pool, but it's also something one for a long time wished for, and whatever. Every ingredient was right, but I was still not swimming, I was still on the bank or simply just about to jump in and swim again. And so now I have swum, and I can say it's been just even more amazing than I thought. And not just that I'm kind of self-importantly feeling I'm doing something amazing, but what was really disarming, not only the harmony in the house, and that they really are who they said they are, and that what they expressed, that is, we want you not because of some kind of profile in the career or because of some statistics or because someone told us to do it or because no one else has been there for us to have. We want you because we got to know you in the work and you're the right person for us. And when I said, so what is it that you want from me? And they said, you be yourself as you are. Okay, maybe very vague, and yet it's really the best possible feeling that I arrived there. I am myself, and it just feels like the best possible mutual inspiration. I'm impressed, inspired, really astonished by the quality of the house, of the approach, professional and human, aspects of which are absolutely top in the whole world. And I don't think, of course, there are so many amazing opera houses in the world, but there are certain aspects of how Royal Opera functions which are absolutely top. We could speak about them at another point, but I'm really so impressed. And they seem to be so inspired by myself. So it's amazing. Czech music, Jenufa, where people who have spent decades, whole lives admiring opera and art, just say the way you presented the opera makes us actually recognize it's one of the best top pieces of the whole opera repertoire. Thinking and feeling that people actually don't consider Janáček and his Jenufa as some kind of export from exotic places, but really an integral part of the best European art in theater. All of that, reviews, some 15 odd reviews, out of which 15 were absolutely raving about musical quality. That all is just fantastic. But on top of it, the public, I really feel so welcome by the London public. And that's something I really didn't expect as much. I thought it will take years for me really to prove myself after this amazing tenure of Tony Pappano, who rightly is considered one of the best opera conductors out there. And he was there, as I said, for 22 years. And I thought, now it's really a hard thing to follow. And yet it feels like the best thing ever. Anyway, it will have its, downs and ups, and every job has it. And the situation of opera on a British market, in a British society, is not easy at all, because, as I mentioned a little bit, by many politicians, it's considered elitist and exclusivist and somehow anachronistic or whatever, too expensive. Even if the opera house actually proves in every single file they produce that they're everything but this. But the start has been absolutely fantastic. So now I feel I am really at a place where I should be, and I'm ready from September to go on in full intensity, so to speak.
You've been very generous with your time. I hope we can still talk a little bit. And from what you said, I as a layperson, I have a question. Why did they name you 3 years ago? Is that a normal thing? That they named the next musical director at Covent Garden 3 years before the end of the tenure of the present one?
Yeah, well, we plan about. My calendar 2 years ahead is absolutely day by day full. It's impossible to change anything. Basically, I have basic features about 2028 already now. In Opera House, we know what titles we will play in 2030. So it's really a normal scale, because the planning is extremely important for the Opera House, really day by day basis, in order to make everything work. But also my predecessor, Tony Pappano, was still there 2 years ago. But if they didn't name me, then I would probably, my life would take me somewhere would have taken me somewhere else, and they wouldn't have had me. It's why it took so long to work there. That's my problem. A nice problem to have, I guess, but the problem on my side, I just didn't have time earlier. So
you were fully booked.
Yeah, we were fully booked. Didn't have time that I sat at home, but I was an opera needs really at least 1 month's time, and there was no way for me to do it. But in a way, I mean, this waiting, which occasionally felt too long, and increased a little bit of a stress, what it would be like in the end, paid off, and I'm very happy where we are now.
And I don't want to get stuck kind of on these organizational things, but what do they do differently in London than in, let's say, in Germany, in Bavaria, or in Prague? I mean, is the organization different? Is the way of working with the musicians, be it the conductors or the instrumentalists, are there differences, or is it more or less the same mode of operation?
No, it's almost is as different as it's almost two different genres. So we have really for lay people now. And by the way, Vita, I think I should go soon because let's have like 5 minutes or something like that. It is two different forms of how opera theater can work. One is called repertoire theater, and the other is called stagiona, and a project theater. So for us in Central Europe, the repertoire theater is typical, which means you have many, many titles being presented in one season. In Vienna, for example, it's up to 50 titles a year, and you come back to things which have been prepared in rehearsals relatively randomly at various places throughout the season. It just comes back and back and back. So you have to actually present many titles at the same time, which creates more variety for the public, of course, but also a very crucial problem that at one point it starts really to go on in an automatic way, so you don't have much input into what quality, what exact result you are presenting in terms of staging, in terms of music details, in terms of personnel in the orchestra. So there's a huge aspect of randomness there, and of course you can still create art on the absolutely top level, and if you have a good ensemble of singers present in the house, you can have a family feeling, which is very worth it, and nothing against it. But for conductor, it's really actually difficult to secure the best possible quality. Unlike in symphony orchestras, where the quality is absolutely essential because you focus on one project, then you deliver it, and then you go to another. Whereas in opera, you focus on one project, deliver it, and then you come back to it in 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 1 year, 2 years. And in some cases of popular operas like La Bohème or Zauberflöte or whatever it is, there are some opera houses where they don't rehearse it at all. It's just, that's what we call in Czech samospát, It goes like with self-functioning tendency somehow. So the conductor needs necessarily to be a bit of a passive person and kind of take what they give you and just, cook from the ingredients you just inherited, so to speak. Whereas in London or Metropolitan Opera, basically in English-speaking world, where also, and that's the other side of the coin, the opera house is not state-funded fully. It's more of a private enterprise based on private money of donors, and that means not just 1 or 2 people, but actually hundreds or even thousands of people who support traditionally the opera house. It operates completely differently. There's a project which holds together for, say, months or 2, and then it goes away. And in London, on top of that, this stability is absolutely adamant to many aspects of what they do. The stage crew is always the same. The orchestra never rotates. It's always the same people who play the piece. The singers don't have alternations because of the nature of stuff. So it's not like every time you go to the theater, you have a different combination of singers. You have always the same the same team,
Ensemble.
and I could go on like there's many aspects of that. So because everything costs so much, and the cost is really people's money, so to speak, concrete people. And if those concrete people don't get happy about what is happening, they just stop giving it, and that's it. It could actually ruin the house. So it's much more responsible in terms of effectivity, in terms of responsibility, and in terms of everyone working on the highest possible level, because they just cannot allow any laziness, any indifference, any kind of, laissez-faire approach. And together with, that's many places, in the West and America, but sometimes then you feel you are actually in some kind of a factory where everything is like, when you produce cars or something. And that's the most amazing thing, that this house on top of it operates in an entirely harmonious and human way, that you actually never feel any hysteria and never feel any additional stress apart from the positive stress of a performance. I'm actually in awe observing how fantastically this opera house works, and really chapeau, and I'm very proud of what I've seen there. And really, one cannot be just different than them. If you enter the house, the ethos, the work ethics is so high that if anyone fails to meet them, he cannot or she cannot survive there. I tell you. So that's what I really. What else can a boss, who I am now, what else can you wish for? Is this ethos of work is absolutely exemplary.
But thank you so much for not minding me bringing you down to our kind of very basic level and having to explain these things, which I could probably Google, but it just came to my mind. I have only very last question, and I will be happy for a very short answer. Your kids now speak to you in Czech, right? In your household, you speak Czech, right? Do you think they will speak Czech to their children? And is it important for you, or you don't care?
Oh, well, it's very important to me, but as much as I can influence, of course. So, I mean, I would very much wish so. I think, quite honestly, if you really want a realistic answer, I think it very much depends on their life partners, because I think it's profoundly more difficult to keep your native language if it's a language of a small country, when your husband or a wife or a partner, the other parent for the next generation, speaks English, for example. So then it suddenly becomes like a niche which you might like or not. I know actually some families of mixed marriages where they have, say, 3 children, and every single child has a different approach to this minority language. But if they end up having a Czech partner, then of course I think the chance is much higher. I think what I observe is their relationship to our country, to the Czech Republic, is very beautiful, and the country is not something indifferent in the distance where they just heard from the parents how important it is. I think they live the relationship to the country, so that's a good start. And I think Czech music plays a part in it, and Czech culture, generally Czech books. We are a very reading family, and etc. Czech movies, for that matter. It's kind of moving and touching, seeing my children, 11 and 8 to 9, actually loving Czech movies of the 60s, 70s and 80s, and 90s. And they find if the movies are good, they just find it as beautiful as the previous generations. That's back to my idea. Maybe we are a little bit like that as a family, that we don't get crazy about fashions, but actually kind of like coming back to some aspects of traditions which are worth representing. And, this dialogue with the past, of course, you have to choose well, because by far not everything from the past was better than now. On the contrary, but if you choose well, at least in terms of art, which I don't think is only actual, but is also timeless, should be valid for any kind of generation that works. And in this way, we are connected to the Czech culture quite beautifully. So let's see what the children will live like in their further lives.
So said the next music director of Royal Opera House in Covent Garden in London, Jakub Hrůša. Maestro, thank you so much for your generosity with time. And well, what can I say? Good luck. And I'm really proud of you. I have to say that.
Thank you. It's been beautiful speaking to you, Vít, and everyone there. And I am proud of us Czechs, Czech culture, Czech country. It's not popular these days to say so, but as I said, against fashion, I say so happily.
And that wraps up this two-part conversation with Jakub Hrůša. His passion for music, deep understanding of Czech musical heritage, and his vision for the future of classical music, I think make him one of the most exciting conductors of our time. It was truly a privilege to have him on Czechast. But the journey doesn't stop there. In the next episode, I'll be speaking with Jakub Hrůša, my colleague and a Canadian with Slovak roots. We'll explore his unique perspective on Central Europe, what it's like to navigate between cultures, and his experiences living and working in Czechia. But we'll also discuss his dissertation thesis at McGill University, which focuses on the political philosophy of presidents Masaryk, Beneš and Havel. I think quite a fascinating topic that connects Czech history with broader ideas about democracy, leadership and morality in politics. And as always, I'd love to hear from you. If you have ideas, comments or topics that you would like to hear covered on Czechast, please feel free to get in touch. And be sure to subscribe to Czechast. Till next time, stay healthy and stay curious. I'm Vít Pohanka. Thanks for listening and naslyšenou.
Czechast, a podcast in English about all things Czech. Whether you're an English-speaking expat living in Czechia and Slovakia, or a descendant of the Czechs, Moravians and Slovaks who left for a better life in America, Australia, Britain or Canada so long ago that you don't speak the language of the old country, this podcast in English is for you.